Oh, George, we haven't recorded for a few weeks, so we're going to do a two-part series or two-parter in terms of this episode. So they'll go out as two separate episodes. So one will be obviously the big discussion this week, which has dominated world football, which is the replacement of the Man United manager Eric Ten Haag following his sacking, and then we're going to talk about England and their appointment of Thomas Tuchel, which are two very big appointments and sort of decisions over the last week, 2 weeks, between the national side and probably, one of the biggest clubs in England, if not the biggest, and about how these sort of operations and decisions are made, and just touching upon some of the factors that surround the replacement of managers and as to why they may be making certain appointments. But when Ten Hag was sacked on Monday morning, was that a surprise to you, or was that something you saw coming, or was it perhaps a lot earlier than we perhaps anticipated?
I think it was the right time. I mean, I went to that West Ham Man U game on Sunday, and to be honest, Lucas, seeing it because we was sitting back from where like the manager's dugout is, he just looked so out of his depth, and I think he knew it was coming. Because the body language just wasn't there at all on Sunday from Ten Hag. Um, I think, yeah, it's the right time. Yes, he's won two trophies. That's what's going around on social media that he's achieved with United. Um, but I think they need to freshen it up now.
I completely agree. He's looked out of his depth for a good few weeks, if not the last year or so. And I think there's been a lot of different factors which have also been discussed by a lot of different media outlets and sort of things like that. So I think, I think the first bit of pressure for this season on that return was the fact that Ineos took over at the end of last season. So I think they awarded him a year contract. They awarded him that extension on top of what he had, right? So I think he had a bit of pressure taken off him because they give him his backing. That is our public commitment to you. That is, your year going forward. Here's the money you want. Here's the players you want. We're going to start fresh. We're backing you, right? So I don't think there was any pressure from that. I think the first bit of pressure was actually the appointment of Ruud Van Nistelrooy, right? Because when you've got someone who's an ex-club legend, someone who was a manager literally months ago, someone who perhaps is looking to get back into the management side of things, someone who could take over from you at any time, sort of unstabilizes your position at any point. And even when I've heard Simon Jordan and all talk this week, they've even said the same thing, whereby they felt that Ruud Van Nistelrooy was going to take over at some point this season, but they just didn't know when. And perhaps this has happened a little bit earlier than we've all anticipated. But I think that's the first bit of pressure. Whereas, he is an ex-United player. Yes, he is Dutch, like yourself, Eric Ten Hag being Dutch. He is someone who knows the United faithful well. He is someone who perhaps is replacing Steve Clarke, and he's giving you that little bit of stability because he's going to connect you closer to the fans. He's going to be working with the attacking players. It is sort of another transitional year because Ineos are taking over and they're giving that support. Actually, I think that's the opposite. I think it's added a little bit of pressure, and as soon as United knew they had someone who could take over at any point, that is exactly what's happened, and therefore they've pulled the trigger sooner rather than later. But I think Ineos have made the mistake of awarding the year contract extension to Eric Ten Hag. Their perhaps second fatal mistake was the fact that they tried to speak to other managers in the summer and hadn't replaced him and then stayed with him anyway. But they've also gone in and taken the perspective of, we're going to support you, we're going to back you, this is going to be a fresh perspective. Why should we change so early? Why should we invest all this money? Well, actually, what they've actually done now is lost about 30 million in this process, I believe, from what I've been reading. But I think that's where the next bit of pressure has come from then, is that investment and the amount of money they've gone on in terms of players, and the fact that it still hasn't worked out, even though he's been arguing that he hasn't had the players for a certain amount of time. Results haven't done well, not winning in Europe for over a year. Their league position sitting 14th and not even in the top 10, not even in the top 6. and battling like they should. So there's obviously been a lot of fan pressure. So when that fan pressure has started to amount, and then when you're going to have a loss against West Ham, who you should not be losing to, I think that was the nail in the coffin. And they've gone, right, why should we go on for a few more weeks? Why should we perhaps embarrass ourselves in terms of our administration? Why should we give him any more backing? Perhaps now is the time to pull the trigger, to install confidence, to go, actually, right, Ineos have made a good decisions from fan perspective, right? Whereby the fans are going, do you know what? They've made the right decision at the right time here to sack him. Okay, perhaps they shouldn't have given that year extension, but sacking him now has been the best movement they could have made. So that's where I think a bit of that sort of effect has come from. I think they had that big meeting weeks ago where it went on for 6 hours apparently, and they had all the sort of propositions and sort of criteria if they were going to make this decision, that they knew when they were going to make it in terms of looking at results and having that in place. And this just happened to be the time that they've made that, and they've already had, you know, this turnaround already, which is looks like is happening. So I think this has been in place for quite a while in terms of that preparation. But I think a lot of these externalities have actually added up and amounted to therefore by Monday morning they pulled that trigger.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a bit of instead of being um, a job that everyone dreams of for United, it's now become a sort of a poison chalice, hasn't it? And I think that it's a situation now that United needs someone that has got a bit of background behind them. There's already talk with Ruben Almiron that he's close, I believe. Um, I don't know if that's the right move. He's highly thought of, Ruben Almiron, but I don't know if it's the right move for him or for United at this stage, considering where they're at. Um, it's just become so, for a club of their size, become so toxic, and I suppose as well with all that going around saying that Sir Alex Ferguson that was there, and wasn't he being paid or something even to watch the games or something? I mean, I always was thinking here at home, like, if he's watching on for games, that's added more pressure surely on that would have put more pressure on Ten Hag to deliver and succeed maybe. Though I'm not doubting what Sir Alex achieved with United, but I think this is it. It's now a transition period. It's not a nice. It's a very uncomfortable position for Manchester United as a whole, for everyone within the club, board, players, whoever comes in to take the job. The supporters are at unrest. We've got the likes of Gary Neville that says his points of view for United, which he does care deeply about United. It shows obviously, but uh, yeah, it's just become that poison chalice now, and I think it's it's so deep rooted now for and it's got so toxic that whoever goes in, there's going to be pressure straight away. But they need that time to readjust. But I don't think Ten Hag was the right man to get them out of their mess. I mean, from that game at West Ham on Sunday, I saw after the game that West Ham maybe were on a trajectory, should I say, going upwards. I could see them building on from that result. If United would have won that game on Sunday, I think it would have just been paper over cracks, as far as I'm concerned. Um, but all I just see with United is not whatever happens now. It's not going to go up. I think it's still going to be a bumpy ride for them.
There's a couple of questions I've got for you in that. First off, Crystal Palace and Spurs played on Sunday, right? And Crystal Palace being a London club, and yet you're at West Ham, another London club, watching United and West Ham rather than watching your mighty Spurs play against Crystal Palace. So answer me that one, George. How come you were at that game and not the Crystal Palace game?
Well, Palace couldn't just get tickets, and with West Ham, it wasn't I could get tickets, but my uncle was a die-hard West Ham fan. And he just said, "Do you fancy coming along for the afternoon and watch a Premier League game?" So I was like, "Well, yeah, why not?" I suppose, just take it in, I suppose, just to
You
see
don't
what
have to
it's like.
justify yourself to me, mate. Like, it's just
Yeah,
curious when you can do what you want, mate. I'm just curious as to, you've got two London clubs and how you've ended up at one and not the other when one is playing your team that you support. It's just curious how you ended up with one and not the other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be fair, I think it was. I mean, I've not been to a Premiership game for quite a few years now. Obviously, that was the ambition, that was the aim. That I would have liked to have, with Spurs, that is the aim still one day. But I think as well, Luca. I mean, it's going off topic what we was talking about with United for a sense, but even to have that experience, having a VAR experience actually live in a ground, I've never experienced that yet. And to having to experience that was like, whoa, what happened there? Like, especially when they said that it was Ings that got fouled, I believe. Um, but it was literally a throwing up the other end of the pitch that United had, and 2 minutes later, VAR intervened saying it's a penalty. I mean, it was crazy. I've never experienced anything like that, but I think this is it. I mean, I've not seen obviously United teams play live in flesh before, but they just looked so disjointed on Sunday. They looked. I mean, Garnacho was their only main threat, I would say. I mean, hit for crossbar early on. They could have had a few goals early first half, maybe United. That open goal miss, I think it was Dalot.
Mm.
Um, as I say though, if they would have turned around and won that game, though, Luke, I think that would have just been paper over cracks. If they would have lost come next week, he'd probably have been out of his job anyway.
I completely agree with you. I think it was just a matter of time before he went, and I think, obviously, dependent on results, then I think it would have just been prolonging the process, which is inevitable. But I think they didn't play well against West Ham, obviously. I know that West Ham had that penalty and they ended up winning the game because of that. But the fact that they didn't play well in the week against Fenerbahce, and they should technically be beaten, though, especially with the amount of money they should be spending. And then they're losing to West Ham. They're two very winnable games, which they haven't even won those or picked up. They picked up the point against Fenerbahce, but they've just prolonged their delay in winning a game in Europe. But it's one of those where I do agree with you. It is a poison chalice because look at, the amount of managers now. I think it's 8 since Ferguson's left, who have taken over. So they've gone for someone like Moyes, right, who very mid-table manager, very stable, get the style of play out of him, could have had success, didn't have it. They then went for a world-class manager like Mourinho, who has been there, won everything, won Champions Leagues, won Premier Leagues, beaten point records and all these kinds of things. Didn't quite work out for him, but still the most successful manager since all of those have been appointed, right? They had before him Louis Van Gaal, who had managed international teams and managed big clubs like Bayern Munich, and done well in Holland as well himself. Someone who's worked with big players, big names, and someone who came out of fighting, right? They then go and appoint Ragnick, who seemed to be the godfather of all the German coaches and what they've instilled, and it didn't work out very nice for him. They went and appointed then Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at one point as well, former United player, backroom member of staff who come in interim and then took over permanently. Didn't work out for him. They re-signed Ronaldo at some point, an ex-United legend. Didn't work out for him. Perhaps there's a split in terms of that fan sort of perspective about his second return to United and how that plays out, but it didn't work out for him, right? They then go and then they bring back Ruud Van Nistelrooy. They've looked at prior before him, Eric Ten Haag, and appointed a very successful manager from Holland in terms of him. And I know Liverpool have just done the same, and they've got very equal accolades at both of those appointments, right? But United went for Ten Hag before Arne Slot came to Liverpool, right? So they've gone for a very sort of varied degree of managers upon sort of, a line graph in terms of their personality, in terms of their success. And yet none of them continue to be working out. Yet they continue to keep spending lots of money. Now they've put stability in place. They've had a change of board, right? They've brought in various people like Dan Ashworth. But yet every time I hear like someone like Gary Neville on a Sunday and he talks about after United games, something is not right at that club, then what is it? What is that actual issue? They go and replace plenty of players. They go and replace the coaching team. They go replace the manager. They replace the board. Well, actually, if you've replaced all those things, where is the real stem of the issue? Well, the next sort of thing you look at, right, is the fans. You can never replace the fans, right? What are you going to do? Go, right, these 100,000 can come, the next 100 can? It don't work like that. So that's the inevitable that you always have to deal with. But take those out, they're not there day to day. So out of those day-to-day issues of all the ones that you've sort of, replaced and looked upon, what is that actual issue then? And that is something which ponders the actual answer. And every time you see like a Sunday debate, right, it is, oh, it's the players, oh, it's the manager, oh, it's the tactics. Well, actually, we keep replacing all of these things, and none of it keeps working out. So I think that's the most interesting thing to try and be on the inside, is to try and identify what that is, and as to why these things aren't working. Because it's not like they got Daniel Levy's not spending money. Well, they have. They spent money. They've identified these players, and they've worked with the manager to get those in. They've gone for highly world class players over the years, and it hasn't worked out. They've gone for former, professionals who are perhaps not at their peak, and to come in and stabilise the squad hasn't worked out. They've gone for young players, hasn't worked out. They've gone for world class players at a time like Pogba, it didn't work out. So again, that varied degree between player, it just doesn't seem to be aligning or fitting in. So has the culture entirely gone at United?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, Ten Hag, I can't remember if it's that figure, but 600 plus million that he spent or whatever during his tenure there, which hmm, is an awful lot of money. I think this is it. United have good players, but they're not a team. And not only that, are they not a team, but they're not sort of world class players that will set alight, I suppose. I mean, obviously they had in the past with Cristiano Ronaldo, Rooney, and so on and so forth. But I mean, this is it. Is I felt that when how do I put it? There's no. I don't feel there's like no. I don't feel there's any identity within United now. I mean, if you had a United team coming to you in the past, you'd have been. I'm keeping it polite here, PG related, but scared. You'd have been quaking a little bit, thinking they're going to turn up here and they'll be up for the game and they'll be ready to fight. And they're going to play ugly at times, but they'll still get them 3 points somehow. Now it's the other way around. Team turn up to your ground and you'll be thinking, oh, result could be 3 points here. It just doesn't make sense how it's evolved so much. I think what I also associate with United is even with Fergie, we were saying about Rooney, Ronaldo, so on and so forth. But really, there's no there was a pathway for younger players to be bred in and integrated in with United. They always had pride within their youth academy. There was youngsters on the bench on Sunday for them. Diallo come on, but there was a few other youngsters. Thing is, he didn't. All right, yeah, maybe chasing the game, but he didn't experiment to give that a chance, and that's where I think your fundamentals of football team start. Is yeah, you can spend all the money you like, but I'm a firm believer that if you've got a youth academy, one of the best youth academies across the country, use it. You know what you got to lose. And Ten Hag didn't. I don't know. There was people that have come in. Don't get me wrong. That people are saying, "Oh, like Kobe Mainu and so on and so forth." Yeah, fair play, but I don't know. It just is so. There's players there that I wonder that they're again like for poison chalice, for poison apple, like Marcus Rashford. I rate him as a there's things that he's done good for community and everything like that. I respect, but his football. It's coming to me now that he's out welcomes his stay at United. He needs to move on. He's not going to help you win trophies and go forward and win trophies. But that's a personal opinion. I don't know what you feel about that. But then you've got a Bruno Fernandes, in my eyes, is not really a captain material. Um, but again, if you look across that whole team, really, who's a proper leader that's going to help you fight again and win trophies? I mean, Casemiro is coming towards the end of his career now. Before too long, next season he might have his Zimmer frame ready. But it's all these different things that is not. It's not cohesive. It's this. It's so disjointed, and even as a neutral, though some people are like, "Oh, this is really good to see United struggling and everything like that." I find it quite sad because of their heritage, their history, and again, it's them supporters. What you're saying, them supporters, if you like, even though they've gone through them glory years, they deserve so much better now, and they need transparency of what's going on.
And I think that's what we spoke about the other week in terms of what I shared about Porto and that agreement that Porto put out in terms of their transparency and what they're doing to connect with the fans a little bit more. And I think that's something that Gary Neville's touched on multiple times, is that transparency from United in terms of those decisions, how they're going about those decisions and what they're doing with them. But I completely agree with you there about Rashford. Just a quick question though. Do you think Rashford is at risk of turning out a bit like Dele Alli?
Yes, absolutely. I think I mean, he had his golden years, if you like Delhi did, but again, he's not kicked on and done anything majorly. He's not even really getting into the England squad that regularly now. You know, with a change of, I mean, Southgate wasn't including him, Lee Carsley wasn't including him. Even if I'm not being funny, but if he still turned around the rest of this season and that he got goal returns and assist returns, I still don't think or I wouldn't choose him in that England setup. I think there's still better players out there, personally, and more hungry players.
100%. I agree with you. And when you talk about those hungry players, you look at the England squad and the qualities that we got right. And we'll touch upon that a little bit more in the next part of this episode in terms of when we talk about England, right? And some of the thoughts that I've had around this and as to why I wanted to have a focus episode. We'll touch upon that more, mate, in terms of Ring Road in this background in terms of Rashford. But I think when you look at the sort of context United over the last 8 years, right? They've had four former players become caretaker managers. So, first one was Ryan Giggs, the second one being Michael Carrick, the third one being Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the fourth one now is Ruud Van Nistelrooy. So, I think when it looks at stability at the club, connecting with legends. That's four ex-players within 8 years who have been caretaker managers at some point. Now, what does that say to you as an external stakeholder involved in football, someone who isn't a United fan?
It probably transfer pays for fans because they're a club legend. But I mean, there was a lot of stick around Ollie, but I thought he did a decent job.
I agree with you there. I thought Ollie had done a good job. And when you actually look at his statistics, right, and you look at how they were actually performing, they weren't actually in a bad position considering. And I think they should have given him at least another year because he was doing actually all right at that point. And I think, after this, Ronaldo debacle, which continued until Ten Hag got there, I think that was an issue within itself, but he could have got there and managed it in the end. But I think they were a bit too hasty to go off and sack Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Obviously, we looked at that. There was a period of time when they had Ralph Ragnick who came in, right? And they, even at the end of the year, I think they agreed that he would stay on to be a football advisor for 2 years. And then suddenly by the end of the year, they agreed that he wouldn't. So I
Mm.
think there's a lot of moving parts within that where nothing has been stabilized. Looking at Ollie and how quick they replaced him, retracting the offer for Eric Ten Hag, removing Ronaldo very quickly when he's a legend in the club. And even now, when you look at this turnaround, yes, okay, it might be a good thing that Ruben Almiron is coming in very quickly by the seams of it. But when you look at Ruud Van Nistelrooy, he's only got one game in charge. Now, perhaps that's a good thing because they're limiting the amount of time which he has in charge of the squad so they get a permanent manager, but then they're not actually given enough time to a manager to sort of have his intake. And I think that's part of it, is that they can still achieve something this year. But for me, it was one of those where it's like, right, November's come in. They could have 2 months now of having Ruud van Nistelrooy and seeing how he performs. And then for January, they could have a complete new manager in place at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is it. Is again, I just feel again with Ruben Almiron, is he the right man to fit and fix everything? I I really don't know. I mean, thinking of it realistically, I mean, with Gareth Southgate that was linked originally, I could actually see Gareth Southgate rebuilding United somewhat to a good standard and to bring people together again because that's what he did with the England national team. And I thought that would have been a pretty good fit. He knows some of the players who've set up there, obviously with the likes of Shaw and Rashford and Jadon Sancho that's out at the moment. But it's like I just don't know, and I think this is it. Is yes, as I say, it's a honour to have that probably on your CV to have that with United, but I think it's too soon for Almiron. For a club of United size, if you like, with the circumstances that's going on.
There's a level that I do agree with you with, and I'm quite surprised that he isn't staying at the Sporting job to take over at City, which has been reported over the last week or 2 weeks, right? Where he seems to be the natural progression from, Pep Guardiola when he decides to leave. And I think there's still some questions over how long Pep is going to be there, whether he's going to leave at the end of the year or whether he's going to have another year or 2 years, right? So I think in the back of Almiron's mind, he's like, right, I'm in a real good pivotal position where Liverpool approached me. I didn't go there. There was talks between Chelsea. It didn't work out. Now I'm being linked to United and I'm being linked to City, but it could be a 2 year delay on City, or actually United jobs available right now. Now it depends on what his personal motivators are, whether he wants to go in United and be known as the manager who turned things around, whether it's going to be, the manager who came in and then the Mourinho in terms of coming from Portugal as a young manager, coming into a big club in England, like United, like Jose did with Chelsea and having that success, or whether it's like, well, actually, I didn't want to wait 2 more years and be at Sporting. I got bigger ambitions. I want to go on and manage the national team in, a certain amount of years and all these kind of things, or whether he wants to get to Real Madrid and Barcelona, those kind of sort of considerations. So I think those internal motivators are very interesting to explore over a period of time, and I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch. But as you said, when it's that poison chalice, I completely agree, because if I was Almiron, I would actually be waiting 2 years or a year, and I would go and get my third Portuguese league title. I would go and continue to build a very good record, and I would just delay until I could get into City. Now, City seems a lot more positive to go into than United, or actually, at this position until these 115 charges and what the outcomes are and how that looks for City, I think is going to display, how the future looks for them. And I think they might go for a recovery period and how that looks. And I think obviously there's going to be a transition period after Pep. So I think there's a lot of moving parts within that which aren't quite in place yet until the outcome of that case arises. Whereas United seems to be a plan which is actually coming together that has overcome the sort of obstacles. So when you look at those two sort of perspectives, I think, United is a good fit for him right now. But I'm completely with you there, is it's too early for him. I personally agree. I think it's, give it to Van Nistelrooy till the end of the year and then appoint Almiron so he can go and get his third title. And maybe, the compensation runs down over that period of time as well, which is included. They can start fresh again next year. But I think it's that case if they feel that they can achieve something this year, so they're trying to move the process very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. And I think maybe they just needed someone to steady the ship. I mean, Sam Allardyce is available, um, but I think, I mean, you hear about the media all the time as well, saying like Spurs, well, they're wanting to be a big club, but they're always failing to win a trophy. I know it's talking on a Spurs perspective here and United, but there's not enough noise made about Manchester United, really. The only people that are saying anything, I suppose, is the likes of Gary Neville and Roy Keane that say it as it is. And whether it's because of their history that they feel that they can't be grilled because of going back to their history, maybe is a point. But there's got to be some serious questions that need answering, and they've got Old Trafford, they've got amazing facilities, but I think again, if you go to United, maybe that's the mentality it is now, is because you're representing United, everything's made too easy for you because you're representing that badge. You're going to be earning a lot of money, and you're not giving anything back in values with winning anything, and it's just it's just really. It, I just can't imagine being a die-hard United fan, what you must be feeling right now.
And I think it is part of that. And I think, when you said about Sam Allardyce there, right, that I think something which I read by Alex Crook off Talk Sport earlier today, and I was going to send it to you, was the fact that he's actually written an article about how he thinks Lee Carsley would be an ideal replacement for Eric Ten Hag at Man United as a long-term successor. And I was like, Really, really, Lee Carsley,
Yeah,
the man who's proved that he can't step up to the England job and wants to go back to the 21s. We've spoke about managers being out of their depth a little bit, but if right now, right, we know that Almiron's going in, but I created this graphic earlier today, right? So you're Sir Jim Ratcliffe, right? You've identified perhaps these 8 managers. Now, other candidates perhaps have included Julian Nagelsmann, Eddie Howe, Marco Silva, and Gareth Southgate, right? Right now, I would put Southgate out of that running. I would put Marco Silva, Eddie Howe, and Nagelsmann out of that running. I don't see Nagelsmann stepping down from the German national team to take over United, but we know it's Amorim at the moment because of what's being reported by Fabrizio Romano at the moment, who's a very reliable source, right? But when you look at these managers and perhaps who have been the senior contenders from the very long list of managers, which is very exciting. Again, it's a bit like a football manager simulation, right? Where you're getting very excited about who could be put in next and who's in the lead and who's in the running, right? But George, you're Sir Jim Ratcliffe, right? And I'm Dan Ashworth, right? Now, I've presented these 8 managers to you. So we got Ruben Amorim, who's managed in Portugal. You look at his 2 clubs, Braga and Sporting, 2 league titles, 3 cups, 10 personal achievements, current win ratio 72%. Very young manager, has potential to be Jose Mourinho version 2, right? Or perhaps V3 because they deemed Andre Villas-Boas to be Mourinho V2, right? You then got Xavi Hernandez, who's managed at Al Sadd. He's then managed at Barcelona. He brought a title back to Barca. He's had 2 league titles, 7 cups, 7 personal achievements. You've then got Zinedine Zidane, a very big player in the history of the game, a very big manager. You know, he's managed the B team. He's managed a senior team on 2 separate occasions. He's got 2 league titles, 6 cups, 3 Champions League titles, 27 personal achievements, and 26 records as a manager. You then look at Graham Potter, unemployed, currently managed Swansea, Brighton Hove and Albion, Chelsea. We know he managed Osterunds abroad as well. He's got 2 league titles, 1 promotion, 1 cup, for 3 personal achievements. So we got someone who's managed in the Premier League in terms of him and what he brings to the table as well, but only has 44% win percentage, right? You then got Thomas Frank. He's worked with Denmark and the 16-17s, 19s. He's managed Bromby, Brentford. He had an EFL Championship playoff, which he won. He's got 1 cup, 5 personal achievements, Premier League experience behind him, a very good manager with a good future ahead of him. Someone who perhaps is ready to leave Brentford, and it's going to be very interesting to see what that step up looks like for him and what success he brings. You've then who's got 45% win ratio. You've then got Ruud Van Nistelrooy, who's currently interim manager, 49 win ratio. A very sort of similar scenario in terms of coming from Holland, being in the same boat as Ten Hag before he's appointed. But, he's got 2 cups as a manager and 49% win ratio. You've then got Eden Terzic, who's managed Dortmund on 2 occasions. He's got 1 cup, 1 Champions League runner-up. Not much in terms of that success behind him, but 66% win ratio. And then you've got Kieran McKenna, who worked with United under 18s and was previously in the first team when Jose was there. He won 1 league with the youth. He's won 2 EFL promotions, and he's got 7 personal achievements. Now, if you're Jim Ratcliffe and you had the opportunity to look at this yourself, who are you going to appoint out of these managers if you were him?
for me,
Now
one stand.
you could appoint someone else who is beyond this list as well, mind. Now I know Unai Emery has perhaps been on a longer list and would be a great shout for that job,
Mhm.
but you've got a choice out of these perhaps 8 which I've identified, or you might have your own choice.
If it's out of them, mate, the outstanding choice to me is Zinedine Zidane. I mean, it's not like he's managing Madrid at the moment. He's unemployed. What you got to lose? I mean, he's got an outstanding CV. I'd go all stops out to get him, if possible, give him what he needs: new car, new house, whatever he needs. I'd say sign on the dot because his win ratio as a player, as a manager, as it's shown with Madrid. Yeah, he's not managing for the top flight Zinedine Zidane, but if you've managed to win multiple Champions Leagues as a manager, that speaks volumes. Um, and I think with the diverse and with the sort of egos that they have at the football club, if I call it that, Zinedine Zidane again would have been the right fit for that, I think, because he sort of matches in that sort of that parameter, that circle. Yeah, he would have been my number one choice, with maybe Thomas Frank as a runner up.
I think that's very interesting. I think when you look at it, right, Zinedine Zidane is the absolute pinnacle choice there in terms of what he's got in terms of those achievements in front of him. And he's already proved himself to manage these very big occasions and clubs. Now, for me, it's very interesting the fact that he's never returned to management since doing very well at Real Madrid. So for me, I think he's waiting for the national team, and I think that's going to be his career. Literally, Real Madrid national team. He had a collective success over that, and then he retired. A very, very, very similar, right, to Johan Cruyff. Very limited careers. They've had a lot of success, but they didn't prolong it for a very long period of time, right? But they're still at the top of their game. They're still considered very high status managers. So I think that's what he's aiming for. He doesn't want too much of the pressures. He doesn't want to be bouncing around a lot of clubs. So I don't think he'll have a lot of clubs in his career. I think you manage France, maybe one other team, and I think that'll be it in his career, right? But I think a lot of the sources were reporting yesterday that Xavi was the main man to take over before Amorim came into the sort of fold, and how quick that's accelerated. Now, I really like Xavi. He's one of my all-time favorite players. I think he's done well as a manager. I liked what he did at Barcelona. He was going to be there this year before they turned around and changed his mind on him. But I think he's got a lot of potential in the future, but I think he is still very young. I think it's going to be very interesting in terms of where he goes next for his own decision, or in terms of what happens next in his career, and certainly what unfolds and what the future brings him, right? But I was in the camp of, right, if I had these eight in front of me, right, Amorim is someone that I wanted at Chelsea. I am a big fan of his. I really like him. He's got a lot to offer. But personally, looking at those numbers, if we were running a club between us, right, and I was looking at the data, and I was looking at what the facts were in front of me, personally, I would go Zidane, and then I would go Xavi, and then I would go Thomas Frank. And yesterday, I actually put a small little bet on Thomas Frank to become the next permanent United manager, because very big fan of his, of course. But that's the sort of running lineup I would have gone for. It's Zidane, Xavi, and then Thomas Frank.
Yeah, good shouts, I think, and that's a good bet. I mean, um, this is it. Is I think Thomas Frank was quite cagey. He did sort of rule it out in press conference, but again, that's a press conference, isn't it? I suppose anyone can say anything. Um, but I think with Graham Potter, this is it. What I don't understand, though, I know this is again overlapping somewhat, but if Graham Potter was mentioned with United job, which there has been murmurs of it, he was linked with the England job. So in turn, with Eddie Howe, he was linked with the England job, but he's not been linked, if you like, in that naming link with United. Yet you think England's one of the biggest jobs that you can have in international football, but so is United at club level. So I'm surprised in the sense that um, more noise hasn't been made with Eddie Howe's name being linked out there for the United job. Um, Kieran McKenna, I can see why there's been things because of his setup. And if you're going down past United's history with former players or people in terms of former staff, then Kieran McKenna's going to fit for Bill, isn't he? Um, but really, it's again one huge step up from Ipswich, and that's no disrespect to Ipswich Town whatsoever. But the pressures again are so vast on United. I mean, they're still in Europe. I mean, as you said, they've not won in Europe for a year. I mean, for a club of United size to not win in Europe for a year is outstanding.
And I think that's the thing, right? Is it is an actual huge thing not to win in Europe for a year. But when it comes down to it, I was completely in the sort of camp, right, that Kieran McKenna's young, he's English, he's a former member of the backroom staff, he's done well with the youth, he's obviously staying very loyal to Ipswich, and they just don't have the budgets to compete, and we're seeing that, especially with the budgets that United have, right? But he's doing the best he can, and I think he is going to do as much of a good job as he can possibly do right now. But again, I think it's a big step up in terms of coming from Ipswich to United. And I think we saw murmurs of that at the start of the year where he was linked with Chelsea and United at the the same time, right? It's like when you're on Football Manager yourself, you have these two great job opportunities that have arisen at the same time. You've got that very difficult decision without that crystal ball to try and make. Now, I think he makes a very interesting reading in terms of what the future looks like for Kieran McKenna. And as we've talked about previously on the podcast, is he does make a shout for the England job, right? And I think he does in a few years' time, and in terms of what his career looks like. But when you look at any of these, right now, we've just touched upon Zidane and where his career perhaps may or may not go. I think it's going to be interesting where Xavi goes. But I think Thomas Frank and Graham Potter, where are the next steps for them? What are the next sort of points? I'll see England have appointed Thomas Tuchel 2-year contract. Now, I don't see Graham Potter being out of work for another 2 years, right, before he goes in and perhaps interviews for a job that he may or may not get, depending on where Eddie Howe is in his career, in terms of what Eddie Howe is doing in terms of that success, and maybe still being at Newcastle. But where do you think the next steps are for Thomas Frank and Graham Potter?
I think Thomas Frank has earned his right to be linked with high-profile jobs, with what he's done at Brentford and with what project that's gone on at Brentford. I mean, how do I put it? He's made himself so comfortable at Brentford that, as it's shown last season, if you have a bad season, they're going to stick with you. But you don't stay at one club all your career. I mean, he's one of the longest serving managers now in all the divisions, I believe, Thomas Frank, which is outstanding. Again, fair play and well deserved. I can see him being linked with any top end jobs, Thomas Frank, going forward. Where he'll go, I'd even have him at Spurs if Andrew was to go. I I just really like everything about what he possesses, how he believes the game should be, and so on and so forth. And he's got unique ways of coaching and management, like as it's shown with the kickoff situation. When I don't know if it was you that told me or I heard it somewhere that they was practicing their coin tosses every training session, and that's why they're scoring so many early goals early on. Something as simple as that, but I love that sort of coaching. Graham Potter, I don't know. With him, I think, and this is a question to you, I suppose, is with Chelsea, do you feel that he could have had longer at Chelsea, or do you feel that the time up was at the right time for him at Chelsea, or how was your assessment on his time at Chelsea?
It was one of those where I'm a big fan of Graham Potter. I think he's got a lot to offer. I think he's an upcoming English manager. I think there's a lot for him to offer. And I think, he suits a club like Spurs, right? If they want to be stable, if they want to be doing well. Or if Thomas Frank leaves, then he's a very nice fit for maybe Brentford and the style they want to go for. Because I think Brentford want to stay in the Premier League, and I think that Graham Potter can deliver that. And I think they sit in the same sort of category as Brighton currently sit in, right? And I think when it comes to those things, I think that he makes a very good fit for those, but I don't think he fit us at Chelsea, and I don't think it was right time for him to step up into that Chelsea role. Because yes, okay, what else can he do? He can stay at Spurs, Brighton for another 8 years, or he could try and wait for a Spurs and then try and step up. Because I don't think Spurs sit in that category in terms of the top sort of clubs in England. Your Arsenal's, your Liverpool's, your City's, your Chelsea's, your United's, which I think United's still sitting there in some context because of stature and who they attract and the money they got available. And I think because of the history of the club. And then I think Spurs sit just behind them in another category. And then I think you've got your other mid-table clubs like your Villas and so on, who are then pushing, and then all your other clubs that sit under that, and then your relegation clubs, right? So I think that Villa are trying to push to be in that same category as Spurs, and Spurs are trying to push to be in that sort of category above them, right? So I think when you look at that sort of context is, what could he do? He took the opportunity that was in front of him to get a promotion and to gain more money and to do well and try and push for Premier League and European titles, and they didn't work out for him. So at the end of the day, he's had a fantastic experience. But for us, it didn't work out. I think he had a great opportunity to take that experience away, but it just didn't quite work out for him. But yeah, I liked him. I think he's got a good future ahead of him. It's just a shame it didn't work out for us. And I think, he's also been linked with United. He's been linked with the England job. He was linked perhaps with a return to Chelsea at one point, right? Very, very slimly. But he's still in the contention for these types of jobs. So I think it's going to be very interesting where he ends up. And I think he is a very curious, there is a curiosity that surrounds him about him coming into a job where his next step is.
Yeah, I think again it smells to me with Graham Potter again, like you was just saying, but Aston Villa would be a good project for him if Unai Emery was to move on. That would fit him to a T, I think.
And I completely agree with you. That's what I was going to say to you then is if someone like Unai Emery moved on, he would go and be a very good fit for a Villa in terms of that stability. But then I think in terms of what Villa are trying to achieve and trying to step up a bit like Spurs, right, is that they've just lost a world-class manager like Unai Emery. Would they want to go and appoint Graham Potter, who doesn't quite sit in that category? And would he fill the fans with a lot of, excitement like Unai Emery has brought in? Would he be that sort of fit for him? I don't think so. So I think, when you look at it, even Brighton are trying to move in a very different direction, and they've gone and appointed a very young German manager to come in because he's very exciting in terms of what he brings and what he started to outline, and their sort of commitments towards pushing higher. So I think it's a very fickle time for someone like Graham Potter. I think it's going to be very interesting because he's been linked with these high end jobs, but I don't think he's quite got there yet.
No, I totally agree, and this is it. I think. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was taken a bit by surprise when Villa appointed Unai Emery. Um, Obviously, a very good fit, and he's done a very, very good job. I mean, that Champions League record already is like, wow, it it captures your eyes, thinking, well, that's like fairy tale stuff, really. But I mean, I have to look on it, and I was only seeing, I think it was a video on TikTok, and somebody was saying it, which is very true. I think Unai Emery has taken them to that next level, but I don't think you can underestimate what Dean Smith did to re-galvanise that Villa. That was again a bit of a poison chalice once upon a time, and he steadied that ship and he got them back up and he got them fighting again, and that has sort of transformed, and now it's gone up the next level up with Unai Emery, and that's what really obviously United, I don't think will get relegated. I can't see it, but they need, you know what I'm saying? They need to go down that sort of path that Villa have, I suppose.
And I think that's it in terms of going down that pathway and having that sort of, guideline to get there, or roadmap to get there. And I think that's the sort of next steps for those kind of ones. But George, we've had a great discussion around United. We sort of elaborated beyond that at the moment. So I think it's going to be very interesting in terms of whether we see the appointment of Ruben Amorim appointed within the next 24 hours. They reckon he's going to be appointed by Sunday. That Van Nistelrooy is going to get at least one game. I think they've got a cup game in the week this week, and I think he's going to have one more game in charge. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see whether he is appointed by Sunday, and whether this quick turnaround actually does happen, and whether what the outline of that is going to be for the rest of the season. So I think it's very exciting as a fan to see someone who brings a lot of a good record with him and what he might be able to bring to United. But it's a shame because as fans, Tottenham and Spurs ourselves, Chelsea and Spurs ourselves, we don't want to see them do well. But I think it's going to be that interesting outlay in terms of what United looks like next and what that turns out to be over the next few weeks, which is exciting from when every time a club appoints a new manager, how that progresses and what the outcomes are.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. But as you say, it's going to be interesting now it develops. It'll either go one or two ways. It'll go really well or it'll go really poorly, and it goes into um, worse state of affairs. But I wish him well if he does take over. Big job to take on. Um, and like I was saying about Ten Hag being out of his depth, obviously us as coaches, Luke, we don't like to see any managers out of their job really, because it's such a volatile position that you can be in, and so bottlenecks and cutthroat, I suppose, the industry can be. But it's a chance now for someone to put their own stamp on it and maybe again on a neutral head put United to where they should be again.
I completely agree with you, mate, and I think that's in terms of what our thoughts have been in terms of this United outlay, and in terms of where we're going to go from there in terms of how that looks. So very interesting to see whether he's appointed by Sunday, but a very good digest in terms of the outlay for United in terms of their appointments, where they're going to go with things, and we can only see from there in terms of what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, my friend. Absolutely. And it'd just be a United sort of thing to happen, though, that they win their 2 games with Van Nistelrooy and decline Almiron and appoint Van Nistelrooy in the end.
Imagine if that was the scenes, mate. Like, in terms of that appointment, whether it works out, whether it happens, or whether that would be a typical United thing whereby they didn't get the manager that they wanted, but ended up having Ruud Van Nistelrooy. But I think if they went for Van Nistelrooy and then give themselves to appoint someone, like a Unai Emery who's world class by the end of the year, then I think that would be interesting. But I think that would be typical United if that was to happen.
No, absolutely. I guess time will tell, my friend.
I think so, and I think it's going to be that interesting thing to go from there, mate. So a good wrap up in terms of what happens. I think this turnaround will be interesting to see. So if you're watching this before Amorim's appointed, fantastic. If you're watching it around the time that he is, then hopefully a lot of our thoughts resonate with yourselves. But leave your comments, leave your thoughts, and we'd be interested to read them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.